Charlotte Howard. I'm executive editor of The Economist, and welcome to what is the biggest event in a series of events that we've done with the support of IBM on data. Today's event is the Data Dividend, Scaling and Accelerating the Impact of AI with Trusted Data. We have two other panelists I'd like to invite on stage. Patrick Bangert, who's the Senior Vice President of Data Analytics and AI for Sears, as well as Ash Duper, the Chief Data Officer for BAE Systems, and Matt Lewis, the Chief Artificial and Augmented Intelligence Officer for Inizio. I thought that, Patrick, we might start with you to ask about the hype here. I mean, there's so much hype. And I think you see that reflected in what Sudeep was mentioning in the enthusiasm within companies to say, oh, we have any problem? How can we solve this with AI? And it can create a kind of exciting and innovative, but borderline potentially chaotic environment, right, where people are distracted by this, and at the same time you need to continue to run a company and meet the long-term goals of a given CEO. So how do you piece apart the hype from what's actually practical and useful, particularly in the short term?
Indeed, there is a lot of hype. And of course, in the technology industry, everything is awesome and perfect, right? And so we have to distinguish the propaganda from reality. I would say about 90% of what you hear is propaganda and 10% is reality. So you have to divide that up. And as Sudeep said, you have to focus on the challenge that you're trying to solve, not on the hammer that somebody advertises. And that's what the technology industry does. It advertises the hammer and forgets about your nail because it's looking at everybody. So I think we need to more or less ignore what the technology industry says and focus on the problems that the company has in-house to clearly define what is the challenge, where is the business value, and then to assess whether or not AI is a useful tool to solve it. Maybe it's not, maybe it is, fine. But to also look at what AI can do. There are a few things that AI can do a little bit faster, a little bit more efficiently than before, but there are a few things that are what I would call net new, which prior to very recently, we just simply could not do. Now we can. And those are cases that are often ignored by businesses as internal challenges. They've never been viewed as challenges because they've been viewed as impossible. Now they are possible. You can write a marketing email to an audience of one. Previously, that would have been impossible because of too expensive. You can search in a secure way all of the documents, including text, slides, video, audio, across your entire enterprise in a secure and data governance way. Previously, you just couldn't do that. So those are some of the net new use cases that do in fact offer lots of business value. Yes, you can also have a headshot that looks like a Viking done by AI. That's cool, but it offers no value. So distinguish the consumer-oriented propaganda from the stuff that's actually of business value to you.
I mean, I think the Viking point is probably subjective, right? Some people would find that of value. But Patrick, do you want to talk about, I'm interested in what your view of the regulatory environment, whether you think that this is something that is a work in progress that's going to take years to hammer out, whether you think governments kind of are getting their act together and have their right advisors in place. What's your sense of what's happening on the regulatory level in the United States? And if there are other examples around the world you'd point to, that'd be interesting as well.
Well, I think regulatory taking years is just a fact. I don't think that that's anybody's opinion. Governments move slowly. The first that's could have come up with something is the European Union with the AI Act. They're redebating that at the moment. Other countries like China, United States are beginning to enter that. We have an executive order in the US now, which is only a couple weeks old. People are still trying to figure that out. In various countries like the United States and Canada, the different states and provinces get to make their own rules. So in the US, we're going to have at least 51 sets of rules, similar situation in Canada. So it's going to be very complicated, and it's going to be evolving, and people are going to change their minds, right? So whatever will be the first law, there will be amendments to that law. So those of us who are in the field, and we do work globally, we have to watch this space actively. So we are having several staff members that do nothing but try to study up which jurisdiction invented yet another clause for their regulation. And if you're developing products or doing services, you're going to have to be compliant with multiple sets of them. And so then the question is, how do you do that? And I think my personal opinion is that the cheapest, most effective way of doing that is to basically be compliant with the most strict set of rules you can find. Then by default, you're kind of compatible with everybody else. At the moment, that's the European Union AI Act. But that answer could be wrong in a few weeks from now as another country comes up with something. So this is unfortunately a big problem and is one of the risk factors addressed, of course, alongside the fact that AI models do make mistakes, right? Them making mistakes is not a bug in the software. It is inherent in AI systems to make mistakes. And so we need to, of course, consider that very carefully, which is the reason why these regulations are there. So it's a lot of work for us AI people to make sure we know what the rules are. But we need to participate in the making of them. There are a number of rules in these regulations that betray the fact that the people who wrote them don't know anything about the AI systems and the science behind it. And then it's very difficult to be compliant with rules that make no sense.
Agreed.
My question is more around the users in taking up a lot of content, as you actually started on with, that now the idea of reading the mortgage documents or any large number of documents and actually asking questions about what's going on.
Yeah, what I was going to add is that large language models are exactly that. They're models of language. All the ones out there have been trained on multiple corpuses of text, part of which is fiction, literally novels, part of which is personal opinions of people that you might disagree with. So they are not models of the world. They do not understand causation and real life logic of physical events. When I drop something, it breaks and things like that. They don't understand any of that. They might have knowledge of science fiction and believe it to be true, right? So if you ask it a question that requires reasoning capabilities, you must not 100% trust the answer. And in that sense, you have to be very careful what you use large language models for, right? Getting them to write a report or an email is fine. Trusting a complicated, reasoned answer, not so fine.
Hi there, Bianca from Butterfly Strategy Consultants. I'm building on this gentleman's question. I'd love to have your perspective of what you think the future of the younger talent is.
So I think part of it's education. I think we've all seen, forget AI, right? People believe fake news and all sorts of random pronouncements. And that's younger people as well as older people. And so I don't think age really comes into it or the generation. It's ultimately education about trying to develop critical thinking. If somebody tells you something, ask whether that's true, whether the sources for that statement, and check it out.
One of the things that I find so fascinating about these conversations is that there are real issues in the here and now that each of you have articulated, right? There are issues of trying to put a structure in place for evaluating opportunities and deploying them. There are issues of how do you think about mitigating risk, regulatory risk in an environment where the regulations are extremely dynamic and perhaps nonsensical. I think, Patrick, your idea of thinking about opportunities now versus to optimize different processes now versus the net new. What can you really do that's absolutely new, which takes you to where Sadiq led us, which is really far out ideas, right? I mean, you can go from the practical here and now, what can we do that will have an impact in the next quarter, to what is really going to have a transformative impact in a way that we couldn't have imagined even a year ago. You understand a bit why this conversation can go from 0 to 180 miles an hour in the course of 30 minutes, right? Because there's so much opportunity here. And I think having sensible people who put structures in place to both facilitate the here and now while having the imaginative vision for how this can be transformative in a good way is part of what these discussions are about. So I'm very grateful to each of you for participating in the conversation and to all of you for your very good questions.